After all these years, we think we finally figured out why one spec does better than most people think at lower ratings. And spoiler alert, countering Ret Paladin is one huge reason. Anyway, with a new content patch and a fresh wave of class tuning, we've collected some brand new data for Solo Shuffle to see which specs are actually better or worse at lower MMR. Let's be honest, WoW is hard these days. Learning a new class means knowing your goals, sustained damage, burst sequence, opener, win condition, min-maxing tips, and more. Sure, you could spend hours digging for all this information on the internet, but what you eventually find might be outdated from sources who might not know what they're talking about. But at SkillCapped, we condense literally everything you need to know in one place, saving you an insane amount of time with thousands of videos organized into courses for every class, while only working with the best and most experienced players in the game. And if you want personalized help with your gameplay, we offer every member one free VOD review every month, and a direct line of contact to a support network of Rank 1 gladiators. We even help set up your UI with the click of a button, avoiding all the headaches of configuring all those add-ons. Everything we offer is backed up by a rating and guarantee where we promise to deliver results or your money back. So if you want to save time and hit your goals fast, be sure to use the exclusive discount link below to get started. But now let's take a look at the best melee at low MMR. As we're entering into the mid-season, being 1800 as a melee puts you roughly in the top 30%, which is a 5% increase from last time and proof that inflation is real. Ret Paladins are crushing this benchmark, but so are Survival Hunters, Unholy DKs, and even Windwalker Monks, with everyone else performing worse to some degree. If we check WoW Arena logs data, we see that all 4 of these specs have relatively low death rates compared to other melee, all while having some of the highest sustained damage in the game. Despite recent nerfs, we still think Ret Paladin is one of the best, if not the best melee in the game for the average player. Simply having the best defensive kit in the game will carry, even if it now comes with less damage. So to start things off, we are going to scatter these 4 specs in the high tiers, putting Survival down in A because it's definitely more challenging to play. We've said before, and we will say it again, doing big damage absolutely carries in Solo Shuffle. But then there is this enigma, Demon Hunter, which has great damage on the scoreboard and barely dies. But according to rating distribution data, Havoc is one of the least likely specs to push 1800, with only 17% of players reaching that benchmark compared to the average of 30 for other melee. What's going on? Demon Hunters have 2 quirks that make them harder on paper compared to other specs. A complicated burst sequence, which is easy to up, and a ton of control, which needs to be managed well in order to carve out true win conditions. So even if you are doing big damage as a DH, it might not matter if you are messing up your burst and CC. If you can correct these mistakes, DH is easily S, but for most players, the spec will be around 1 tier lower. And this is also where we will put both warrior specs. Arms and Fury are doing good at lower ratings, but not nearly as well as some of the other heavy hitters. Don't let that fool you, however, since warriors are still a solid neutral pick in the meta and are highly accessible for most players thanks to having a relatively low skill floor. The only other melee we think deserves to be in the highest tiers is Assassination Rogue. This spec was recently buffed in the latest wave of class tuning, maintaining an enormous lead over Sub and Outlaw at every rating. Rogues in general can be a bit challenging to play at low MMR, with people routinely messing up stun DRs, breaking CC, or simply hitting the wrong target. While these definitely can be issues for Assassination as well, they're generally less impactful considering most of your impact comes from dealing consistently high AoE damage. If you can consistently keep up empowered Garrets and spread Rupture during your subterfuge window, you're already doing half the work needed for big damage. The main learning curve for Assa is defensive play, as you will often be a kill target against other melee. Sub is definitely more punishing to play, while Outlaw still lacks finishing power, which is why these 2 specs will go in the mid to low tiers. Then somewhere in between, we will put Feral Druid. This is a spec that is currently trending at higher ratings, especially in 3v3, but still hasn't caught on in Solo Shuffle. Having an average rating much closer to Sub and Outlaw, despite being somewhat similar in design to Assassination Rogue. And while we would typically say Enhancement Shaman is better at lower ratings due to its insane burst damage, recent nerfs will probably make the spec more frustrating to play, as you can't rely as much on gimmicky one-shots and instead need higher uptime to build pressure. Frost DK is more or less the same story. During the expansion, their damage profile shifted from bursty one-shots to more sustained DPS, which isn't exactly ideal as a melee with limited uptime and no Mortal Strike effect. So for now, these are our rankings for melee DPS and Solo Shuffle for the average player. But what are the best specs for ranged at low MMR? Let's find out. Just like Melee, being 1800 as a ranged DPS puts you roughly in the top 30%. But unlike Melee, where there are only 3 specs above this benchmark, the meta is more balanced, with BM Hunters, Balanced Druids, Fire Mages, Evokers, and Demonology Warlocks outperforming. But then there's one spec that always seems to be doing fairly well at lower ratings, despite the fact that we think it's hard to play. It's Shadow Priest. We're always confused when we look at rating distributions because SP outperforms specs that are objectively better, and we think we finally figured out why. Shadow Priest does well into Ret Paladin. We wouldn't go so far as to call it a hard counter per se, but being one of the tankiest casters with anti-Ret mechanics seems to go pretty far. Because of this, we're going to put Shadow Priest in the high tiers. As far as the other high tiers are concerned, BM Hunter should be a no-brainer as it's consistently one of the best performers across all ratings, but the data on marks is a bit confusing. If you ask any rank 1 player, they will tell you that MM is one of the best specs in the entire game. But despite this, the spec is lagging behind at lower ratings. Of course, it has a ton of damage potential, but as always, it's a very common target in solo shuffle with one of the highest death rates in the game. Because of this, Marks is going to be around one tier lower compared to BM for most players. And despite being a common kill target in Arena, balanced druids are doing really good at low MMR, due in part to having multiple kill windows every game thanks to that second charge of Incarnation. When tuned well, Boomkin is usually a good pick for beginners simply because of how easy it is to deal high damage. Speaking of which, we're also going to put Devastation Evoker near the highest tier. Despite some recent comments we've been seeing, this is one of those specs that is doing really well across the board, having an average solo shuffle rating within 20 points of BM thanks to some amazing damage output. In fact, when we checked WoW Arena Logs data up to 1800, Devastation leads sustained damage among all casters by a fairly big margin. So if you're wanting a spec that does well at lower ratings, any of these options should work. But now let's talk about Warlocks, because this is a very polarizing class. According to the data, Demo seems to be performing the best up to 1800, but we still think Destro is up there too. We know it's super frustrating to get trained, and being a Destruction Warlock makes you an instant target, but right now the lethality of Destro is absolutely insane, and one thing most people don't know is that Warlock defensives are not nerfed in dampening, which is kind of a big deal in solo shuffle. Affliction is still lagging behind at low MMR, and this might be more of a testament to the pace of the meta more than anything else. With the game being super fast, the slower attrition ramp of Affliction isn't cutting it. Demo Warlocks can slow down damage quite well, and Destro at least has the ability to punch back. Because of this, Affliction will be the lowest ranking Warlock spec. And we're also going to spread out our mage specs across different tiers. As we mentioned earlier, Fire is doing extremely well, having one of the highest win rates in the game, and Arcane was doing well when it was one-shotting earlier this season, but after getting nerfed multiple times, including the most recent wave of tuning, Arcane has fallen off at lower ratings. But by far the worst mage spec is Frost, with only 17% of players managing to push past 1800. Finally, we're going to put Ellie Shaman in the B tier. It's not bad per se, but it's more of a support spec than anything else, and you can't really control the game offensively, which isn't ideal at lower ratings. Anyway, these are our rankings for range DPS for players looking to push 1800. But now let's take a look at the best healers up to rival ratings. Just like DPS, being 1800 right now puts you roughly in the top 30%, which suggests MMR is maybe better for healers this season. But anyway, the best performing specs up to this rating include Resto Shamans, Priests, and Preservation Evokers of all things. Resto Shaman makes sense, even though it's lost a bit of dominance since the early season. It's still really solid in solo shuffle, and fairly easy to play in terms of putting out big healing numbers. Of course, you have a ton of extra responsibilities as a shaman, but that's kind of a good thing at lower ratings. Less damage to heal means you can focus on other things, and actually support your team offensively. In fact, we've noticed this trend over the years. The healers that can contribute offensively seem to do better at lower ratings. Disc Priest and Holy Priest are perfect examples, both having solid damage output and a ton of offensive utility. Void Weaver is a bit awkward to get used to since it forces you to play like a healer and a caster at the same time, but you could probably steamroll low MMR games once you nail the rotation since you're going to be carrying your team offensively. Preservation Evoker is a bit of a weird pick since historically it has struggled at lower ratings. However, with the change to Nullifying Shroud and the fact that mages and warlocks are worse at low MMR, Evokers are in a good spot. And again, having a ton of damage and CC potential means you can actually carry games as a healer. Even though it does less damage than Void Weaver, it has significantly better tools to steamroll pressure from kicks, knocks, sleepwalk, AoE purges, and stuns. Anyway, these are going to represent the best healers for low ratings in Season 3. Everyone else seems to be lagging behind pretty hard, especially Resto Druids, who have the lowest average rating across all healers at just over 1650. Despite recent buffs to Reactive Resin, we still think Druid will be a challenging healer to play. The meta still is quite fast, which isn't a Druid's strong suit, and this season is especially brutal since Hunters, Evokers, and Demon Hunters are all quite popular and all have AoE purges to strip away HOTS. Mistweaver Monk is also struggling hard, but might feel slightly better after recent buffs. Monks lost a ton of damage to Rushing Wind Kick and Crackling Jade Lightning, and have struggled to find an identity this season. Monks can also be more punishing to play at low ratings since you have fewer cooldowns compared to other healers. This means getting extra punished by your DPS, making any defensive mistakes. You would think then that Holy Paladin would then be a good healer for lower ratings, and although that's been true in the past, right now Pala has the lowest HPS out of any healer across all ratings. Sure, it has the CDs, but it doesn't have the numbers. These 3 healers will be spread across the mid and low tiers. Every expansion, we help thousands of healers just like you hit their rating goals. Like Gizmo here, a Resto Druid hard-stuck-it rival with over 5,000 games played, who gained over 600 rating in a few weeks just by using Skill Capped. Our damage and healing courses save you weeks or even months of your time, condensing down everything you need to know into bite-sized videos. You don't have to be scared to sign up because we have a rank up guarantee that promises you will gain at least 400 rating while using our service. So if you're serious about climbing, visit the discount link below to get started. Anyway guys, we want to thank y'all for watching. See you soon.